The last point, I would appreciate if you could ask your voice questions during the last 15 minutes of the program, which is dedicated to Q&A. For recent consistency, please refrain from asking questions with the microphone during the program. This meeting is organized by the Student Association of the Painting Department at the University of Art in Isfahan, Iran. We hope this program will be beneficial to you. Thank you so much. Okay, Professor, we are ready for you.
Okay, do you know, are you going to be doing closed captioning or are you going to be translating as I go?
No, there won't be any translation. The Google Meet has captions, so I will turn it on.
Okay.
And yes, we will continue.
Okay, great. All right, so good morning. My name is Lauren Renzetti, and I work at Seneca Polytechnic in Toronto, Ontario, in Canada. And unfortunately, I only speak English, so I'm not going to be able to give you anything in any other language. And what I'd like to do is, because we're visual people versus verbal people, maybe, I'd like to share with you a PowerPoint. And the PowerPoint consists of different materials, different techniques in printmaking, and some of the examples are by famous artists, some of the examples are by myself, and some of the examples are by students that I teach at Seneca in an illustration department. So I'll share my screen. Okay, sorry, I'm just having some technical difficulties. Google wants to do things that I can't do. Okay, I think I might have found it.
Oh, really?
It was hidden in another thing. So let's see if this.
Oh, that's okay. That's
great. Okay, all right. I have no idea how I found that.
Okay, right. That's good though.
All right, so can you see the whole screen?
Yes, it's okay.
Okay,
we can zoom.
Okay.
It's okay.
All right, that's
Thank you so much. We're
okay,
ready for you.
So phew, I'm a bit of a Luddite. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so what we have, I've done this in sort of alphabetical order because it's really hard to be logical about printmaking. There's about 20 different ways for printmaking, and so I'm just starting in an alphabetical order because I figured that was the easiest way. So collagraphs are shaped, textured prints. This is the plate and a stamp, and it is used in a press with wet paper. And here is two examples of prints. Whenever I'm looking at the materials, I'm using my own projects because I don't have the plates and the materials of the famous people, especially since some of them are, 1,500 years old. And so you can see that the metal is textured and the paper is textured, and then the stamp is the thing that's on top. So these are the plates that I was using, and this is the finished product. There's a couple of other monoprints. And so monoprints are really collagraphs are really lovely in terms of adding texture to something. And you can use any kind of material. You can use tape, you can use bubble wrap, you can use paper, card, and you rub the ink on to create a textured surface. It does require a press. Okay, cyanotype is printing using the sun. So what happens is you use a two-part emulsion, which is the bottles to the right. And what winds up happening is you use Mylar with an image on it, and you put it on a piece of paper that has the emulsion on it, and then you put it in the sun. So, or with a light really close to it. And as the light is on it, it changes and becomes a deeper and deeper color. It can be many different colors. Here is the example of the left side is showing what it looked like before the sun had hit it. So you can see that there's a bit of a pink area there. And then just sitting it right in the sun for about half an hour, you can get some really beautiful, fine detailed images. Nature is one of the things that was used originally. Cyanotype was invented in about the 1800s, and it was used to help document botanical plants. So that was where its origin came from. This is using glassware, not by me, but really beautiful sense of volume and form and value. And so these would all be lying down on a piece of paper. There's a few more that are looking at it from the standpoint of plants. Leaves, depending on how fractured or old or looking like sort of a doily where there's some transparency in them, the sun will bleed through depending on what it is. Here we have just using things like saran wrap and plastic. So if the plastic is clear, then you have a much more interesting information. On the left-hand side, there's a bit of cheesecloth and burlap. And so depending on what you're working with, it could be more or less transparent. Here's a few more examples just to sort of show what kinds of things you can do with it. And this is a student work. During the COVID, there was a really limited ability to, wouldn't work in the studio. People had to work from home. And so one of the projects we gave them was working with cyanotypes so that they could, everybody kind of has access to the sun, hopefully. And so there was a bit of troubleshooting with that, but some really interesting projects came out of it. Now, intaglio is an entire realm of printmaking. I'm going to show you dry point and sugar lift and some copper plates. Here's some of the tools you would be using. So you would be using plexiglass. The blue is just a protective shield on it. You take the blue paper off and you would carve into it. The thing that's great about plexiglass is it's clear, so you can have a design, drawing, photograph underneath it, and then you can copy it. So you're not trying to draw freehand, and it can create a really beautiful extension to drawing. So Albrecht Dürer was someone who did engravings. Now, engraving can be on copper, it can be on wood, and he's sort of the oldest printmaker I have in my examples. And he was quite famous for his engravings. The Fall of Man on the right-hand side is probably maybe his single most famous piece. And you can tell that there's a lot of really beautiful aspects with the form, a lot of cross-hatching and line work and shading. Andy Warhol also used intaglio, and he used it with color. So all of the line work that is the sharp black lines in these shoes, as well as the writing below, would have been done in intaglio, potentially after he did silkscreen on top. He would put a silkscreen on top of it, and then he would do the intaglio on top of that. You can print in intaglio in color, and so some of these are a little bit of both, but it is a question of scratching. So say the holly in the bottom left-hand shoe has a little bit more line work in it. These are some examples of French prints from the 1800s. And the one on the right, you can really see the scratching and mark making, cross-hatching, and the layering of lines to create a really rich, dark area. The one in the middle is also working in that state. Now, the one on the left, they would have actually done the drawing, but then they would have put it in an acid bath to really etch the darker areas so that they were very, very rich. Now, in Canada, we have a gentleman named David Blackwood from Newfoundland, and these prints are ginormous. They're really, really huge. He would create plates that were 4 feet by 8 feet in size. So like a piece of drywall or a piece of plywood, really, really large. And he would work on them for about a year. And it would take him and several other people to ink it up. So what happens is he would initially do the drawing. He would immerse the entire thing in an acid bath to make the really rich, dark colors. And wherever you see white, in particular with the icebergs on the left and the bubbles around the whale, those areas would be blocked off with a resin so that the acid wouldn't eat away at those areas. And it would take about a year to develop the print. So he would draw it, put it in the acid bath, take it out, try printing it, draw more on it, put it in the acid bath. And so there would be these various beautiful layers of tonality, particularly in the water. And then the other thing he would do is he would sometimes use more than one color in the print. So the boat that's on fire has a red tinge to it, and you can see it sort of spread out. It's not that it's contained in just that, in just the boat, but it's a little bit in the sky and a little bit in the water. Same with the one on the right with the sun coming in. He was a storyteller, and all of his stories were based on Newfoundland and Labrador and fishermen and how turbulent and difficult whaling was. And so these stories are probably about 100 years old. And the one on the left, one of the things that you can do with the rosin is you can impress lace and fabrics that have patterns in them, embroidery. And what happens is the thicker yarns and threads would immerse further into the rosin, and the lighter things would not be impacted as much. And it's a beautiful technique because you can integrate drawing and fabrics within that. The other thing that his work is really beautiful for is just his viewpoint on things and the perspective. So the middle visual is this fabulous image of a boat looking from potentially the person in the tiller and looking towards the two people in the front. And again, you can see that he's using quite a few colors. And sometimes you would print different colors separately, and sometimes you would print them together. So where the marks are crisper in color, I believe the boat one in the center is it's been printed twice on top of each other, but the left and right ones, it's all printed in one go. And showing sort of the aurora borealis up in the sky. And when you have things like that really, really crisp moon at the top and the very white areas by the sort of the mountains there or hills, you would potentially really rub those away. So the process is you would be rubbing the ink into the surface, and wherever there's grooves and valleys, the ink wants to stick and hold. Where the plate has no marks, no lines, no fissures, what winds up happening is the ink is more easily rubbed off. In this case, he probably would have used his finger with a cheesecloth and really tried to make it as crisp and clean and white as possible. And so that extreme dark to that extreme light creates really a beautiful sense of depth. Again, this one would be a 4-foot by 8-foot print. And his prints go anywhere from $40,000 to over $100,000. So here's some dry points by myself. And so one of the things that you can have, so I'm using just a very small piece of plexiglass for the moon on the right-hand side, top right corner. That's the piece of plexiglass. And I've just drawn marks in it. Other plexiglasses are different moon shapes, And the bottom right one, I've added an inclusion of metal paper, tissue paper that's gold, and that's called a Shinkolay method. So you can add inclusions into that. Tissue paper, Japanese papers, you want them to be very thin, and they get sandwiched in at the time of printing. The print on the left, I could have made it extremely clean so that you would have just seen the hand, and in this case, Vulcan writing, because I'm a big Star Trek fan. But I decided I wanted to leave a little bit of grunge or a bit of dirt around the edge just to create a little bit more sense of form. This is a sugar lift print. And sugar lift is another sort of intaglio print. What winds up happening is you have a copper plate. You're given ink that has carnation milk in it, so a very, very rich, creamy, sugary milk. And what happens is you paint that onto the surface, and you can paint it very thin, you can paint it very thick. And what winds up happening is as you put this in an acid bath, the sugar literally lifts off, and it takes a while for it to be burned away by the acid. And so that's where you can get that sort of dappled look. You can get a bit of different variety of value. This plate was actually put in the acid bath several times just because I really wanted to have the line work really dug in deeply. And so on the left-hand side, I've done that Shinkolay method again, where I've added a little bit of paper in the eyes and in the shirt. And then the other thing that's great about printmaking is digital printing is still considered printmaking. It's just considered experimental and more modern. And so what I did was I put this specific image into an art rage program, sort of like Photoshop or Illustrator. And I just used the bucket method or the paint method to just fill in certain areas with different values, just to sort of see how that would turn out. And it's easy to alter, right? It's also easy to have layers in it. This is some student work, and the emphasis was looking at landscape and looking at time of day. So as you can see, one of the things that can happen is you can be very, very clean with the ink and really be very prominent in the removal, but you can also kind of paint with when you're removing the ink, you're using newsprint or cheesecloth, and what happens is that can create a really interesting nature and dappled look to it. So the one in the middle is probably the cleanest one. Now, the hazard of intaglio in dry point on plexiglass is you can get a furriness to the line work if you don't remove enough. So the one on the right, the windshield wipers, the steering wheel, the front grille of the car, you can see that it's a bit furry, right? And so it's not a great print because of that, but she was using 4 colors, 2 different browns, a bit of a red and a bit of a blue and black. And so it's quite difficult to get it just right. So this was a very successful series of prints. And in that brown one on the right, you can even see a finger mark at the top, which is one of the challenges with rubbing the ink off. Another pair of prints by Janelle, and you can see she's trying to create a different time of day, sort of different weather patterns on the left, and showing that the lights on the bridge are radiating out. There's a few other prints by students, and just looking at different stories. And so all of these prints would have had a drawing underneath that they would have worked. And you can see that it says no trespassing in the top left. It's written forwards in this, but they would have had to write it backwards on the paper because the print is reversed when it is printed. So the design, it gets a bit tricky. You have to kind of think about where things are going to go. And if the composition is good, it doesn't matter if it's backwards or forwards, but if there's words, you do have to pay attention to that. Interestingly enough, this is actually an image from Iran, one of the alleys and laneways that she walked through to get to school every day. And really beautiful line work, lots and lots of mark making. This print took quite a bit of time to work because every time she printed it, she wanted to make sure that back laneway at the very end and the front sort of arch was dark enough to show the difference in value. And, sort of the use of how the ink is put on can create a really beautiful sense of, wood, grass, plains, sky, and, you can get some really beautiful marks with it. Another sense of mark making, the one thing that can be a bit of a trap is when you're using, say, something like a Q-tip or your finger, it might make too many marks. In an ideal world, you don't really want to see the mark of the ink removal, which is what's happening in both of these, but you can also play up that as an extra bit of texture in the object. So the building on the right, they're being very linear with it to kind of help convey what's going on in the building, whereas the one on the left, there's a bit of a spiral pattern happening in the right-hand side of the building, and that's okay. I mean, it is what it is. You just try your best. These are students who only do printmaking for 14 weeks, and many of them have never done any printmaking before. So it's a huge learning curve with each project. So monoprinting is a relief form of printmaking. You'd be using ink that tends to be water soluble, and you'd be using brayers, which are the handled rollers, the burgundy and blue rollers. And then to clean up or to move the ink, you'd be using spatulas, and to remove the ink, you'd be using a glass scraper. Not shown are the plates and the plexiglass inking where it's rolled out, which you'll see next. So this is a very messy and yet very busy bunch of colors. So you might use several colors all at once, and ideally you'd like to have a different brayer for each color. Underneath is a piece of plexiglass, and the tape is to hold the plexiglass down so it doesn't move. And here are some different things that you can use to create monoprint. So monoprint means you're maybe only going to get one out of that plate, whereas with the dry point etching and the collagraph, you could literally make hundreds of prints before the plate degrades and stops working. But monoprint is just a one print. So on the left-hand side, these are the tools that were used to create the marks in the print to the right of it. And the jelly plate is a plate made out of gelatin, and it's quite squishy. This is a couple of prints using a piece of hard plexiglass. The ink is rolled on first, and the left-hand print, what I've done is I've used just a tongue depressor, piece of wood that I've cut, and I'm just scratching into the surface of the plate and then putting paper on top and burnishing it. On the right-hand side, there's several layers of ink on top of each other, so you can develop quite a bit of depth with that. Another monoprinting technique is using plasticine. So creating a soft rolled bed. You can use dough, bread dough as well. It doesn't work quite as well because the ink tends to dry out with it, but an oil-based plasticine is really wonderful. And so what I had done was I created shapes, and then I just embedded circles, buttons, ends of pens, blocks of wood, and then I'd roll the ink onto it, and then I'd hand rub it. And you can roll several values or colors on the plate, and you can be quite quick with it. And that's why in the case over here where we have the yellow and the red together, there's these little dots of ink. This was all done in one plate in one printing. And so you can add layers of color that can be quite interesting. Another print method, which is sort of drawing based, is I coined it as a yin-yang print. I haven't found another method, another way of calling it that, but basically you have a piece of plexiglass, you put ink on it, you put a piece of paper on top of the plexiglass, and the only thing that's touching the plate is a pencil. So you can't put your fingers on it. And so you do a drawing, and what happens is the surface is touched by the pencil, and the pencil winds up picking up just the ink. So the left-hand side on the back of that piece of paper is the drawing in reverse. And on the right-hand side, what happens is before the ink has a chance to dry too much, you put a new piece of paper on top of that plexiglass, and you burnish it with your hand or a roller or brayer. And then what it does is it picks up everything that's left off. This is combining two types of prints. So the monoprint and plexiglass with the yellow, blue, and red happened first, and I used combs and scrapers. And then what I did was I put black ink onto the same size plate, and I just drew a pair. And so you can see how sometimes if the ink is really, really thick, you get a nice, rich, dark line. And then the second print is me burnishing it onto another piece of paper. So here's just a different series of monoprints and sort of some of the things that you can do with them. You can use oil paint, you can use oil ink, you can use water-based ink. The great thing about water-based ink is very easy to clean up. The oil-based ink is a little bit harder to clean up. You need to use spirits or baby oil or olive oil to clean up. This is a series I'm working on right now, and I'm using oil paint, and these are fairly large format prints. The one on the left is 14 by 24. And there's other things going on. There is the moon and the grasses are using a paintbrush to apply to the plexiglass. And the Venus of Willendorf and the skull are prints that are used using stamps, relief carved stamps and soft oleum. The one on the right has a stamp of a couple under an umbrella. So that's a stamp, but everything else is using the oil paint. And I've included thread. So I've moved into trying to be a little bit more mixed media with my work. The other thing that's great about mono printing is you can keep printing the same print over and over again, but you need to reactivate the ink and put new ink on. But these three prints were done all right after each other, and they're again fairly large. They're 12 by 24 in size, and as I was printing, I was sort of changing the color and changing the amount of ink. And I was also changing what was going on in the moon, just in terms of how much ink, how much information, scraping away, rubbing, and how it was burnished was pretty much the same. With monoprinting, you can print layers on top of each other. So in the case of all of these, the bright pink magenta spirals happened after the first layer, which was the greens and the lighter pinks. And then afterwards, I used a stamp of a person with a hat or people with umbrellas, and to just sort of try to think about how we look at the world, trying to tell a story, trying to convey sort of the umbrella for me is a metaphor for we very rarely look around us and experience the world by looking at everything. And this is the same with a hat, right? When you're wearing a hat, it's to block out the sun. And so you don't tend to look up at the sky. And now this series is mono printing as well. And in the end, I made about 35 prints in one sitting. And I was just exploring the notion of a meadow and looking at distant hills. In this case, the hills are pink. And then what was going on with the sky. As a painter, I go on location into farmers' fields, into meadows, and I spend a bit of time just painting watercolors and drawing. And as the sky changes, the light changes, and what happens in the meadow changes because of the light. It also is a question of seasons. So, you know, being there in the spring, being there in the winter, being there in the fall, different, and summer, different things are going on with wheat fields, with corn fields. And so that's why it's sort of the same idea, but I've just changed what colors are being used. And I've also included beads sewn into it to kind of use them as a metaphor for sort of plants and flowers that are happening in these meadows. And so here's a few more. So you can kind of see how things would progress and change. So the one on the left, a lot of that blue in the sky disappeared with the second one. And then also thinking about fall. Fall here has a lot of browns going on and really deep, rich, sort of tertiary lavender colors. And I'm not going to show you all 37 of them, but I do want you to see just how you can see where some of the ideas from previous prints still show and are revealed. Okay, relief printmaking is probably the easiest and most accessible. Mono printing is pretty accessible too. And so this is some of the tools that you'd be using. You'd be using ink. You'd be using there's several types of linoleum. This is called soft linoleum, which is very much like rubber erasers or Staedtler erasers. It's very soft, very easy to carve, and the carving tools are the handled tools that are red. And then brayers are used to roll the ink onto the plate, and mixing colors and cleaning up the plates are the tools at the bottom. Again, here's what some of the inking you'd be using. You know, depending on where you're at, you could be using lots of colors at once. I tend to do that with mono printing, not so much with lino printing. But the thing that is wonderful about that as a painter, when you're spending time on a painting, you are looking at color and you just get one painting out of it. And if you get it wrong, you're sort of, well, that's a bit disappointing. I have to work on something else. With printmaking, you can make the same print 100 times with any combination of color. And so the experimenting is really fabulous. And so this is a piece of linoleum that's been carved. And a tessellation is sort of just looking at a tile that repeats. So the main image is sort of that starburst, but then there's this lovely little sort of flower shape that's developed through the edges. This is a piece of hard linoleum, and you'll notice it has burlap on it. It creates a much crisper line, but it's much harder to carve into. You need to heat the linoleum up a little bit so that it is easier to carve. And the print on the right is using the plate at the top. And so the plate at the top, I've removed some different things. So you can see where the orange is revealed, and that orange was carved away to then do the pink and the deep red and the magenta and the purple. This is a reduction print as well. And the way sort of the process works is you start out with what do you want to have as white? And then what do you want to have as your lightest color moving into your darkest color? So white is the first carved area, and that will reveal the paper color, and the paper could be any color. Then what happens is you roll ink onto it. In this case, it'd be the very light yellow in the sort of a orangey yellow in the center. And then that orangey yellow is carved away, and the lime green lime green ink is coming out. Then from the lime green, it moves into a little bit of a darker green, and in the end, the very dark green in the center is used. So you're reducing the surface of the actual plate. You can also mix and match things. So you don't have to be true to just the medium. You can have other things going on. So all of these are lino plates, and I have done watercolor in the top left before I printed the elm. In the bottom left, I've used chincolet paper. So I've put on a bit of a collage of tissue paper. And then on the right, I've used a Campbell soup can. Andy Warhol's definitely my hero. And so I wanted to kind of play off his notion of portrait of object and portrait of person. Now, Edvard Munch is a Norwegian painter. You might know him for The Scream, which we'll see in a minute. He used wood, and so the two left-hand prints are actually using woodcut, and the wood grain is one of the aspects that's kind of showing through with the print. And on the top right, he's using wood, but he's using a lot more carving so you don't see the wood grain. Now, I've made a mistake here. The middle print and the bottom right-hand print called The Vampire, both of those are lithographs, which is using a piece of limestone, and it is all about drawing very greasy inked ideas onto the plate. And the premise is water and ink don't like to work together. And so it's another format of drawing that's really lovely. You have to be in a print studio. It requires almost a month of preparation for the plate because you have to grind the stone down. So I'm not showing you very many of those just because you're not going to have a 250-pound piece of limestone in your kitchen, and you're not going to be able to afford a press and things like that. You really do need to print in a studio. Here's a few more by Edvard Munch. Now, he was, at the time of him growing up, tuberculosis was a really big thing in Norway. Thousands of people died from it. It was very contagious. He had several siblings. He was the only survivor in his family. So his mother, his father, and all of his siblings died from it, and he nursed them to health and did not die from it. And so the right-hand side image, you can see little faces inside sort of the wood grain look, and that is the two people that had died before the person that's in the bed. And so basically they're all mourning the loss of this latest family member. So this is the Scream print on the left-hand side, and this is the original painting of the Scream on the right-hand side. And he sometimes would work on the print first to just sort of figure out how he wanted the marks to be made. The printmaking really influenced how he painted. He really liked linear marks in his paintings. I'm not going to say which came first, the chicken or the egg. Sometimes he would actually do them simultaneously, which I believe is what happened with the Scream. He was working on them at around the same time, and he had he had access to a print studio, he was not necessarily well off. So working in the print studio, he had to really pick and choose his time because he had to rent the space and the ink. With the paintings that he was working on, he could do that. He could do that at home or in his home studio. Kathy Kollowitz is an artist in Germany. And what's interesting about her work is she was married to a doctor, and she would help out in his practice by being sort of the administrator to accept patients and get their history. And she would talk to them. And during, sort of World War II, there was a lot of strife for many people, especially the poor and people who were not in the army, and families. So men would go off to war, the women and children were left bereft. And of course, if you're going to the doctor, you're sick, right? So you're not doing well health-wise. And she was very interested in this story, very interested in their loss. And she did predominantly woodcut, but she also did sculptures, she did painting, she did drawing. And so they're quite sad pieces. But she also was really interested in the politics of what was going on in the world, and how people were trying to fight back. So very interesting, energetic, heart-wrenching pieces. Now, switching gears, Alan Kitching is, I believe, still alive. Maybe not now, but I'm thinking he might be, from Durham, England, and he's a typographer. So newspapers, almost a thing of the past, are typeset. So what happens is every single letter is separate. Sometimes there's words clumped or grouped together. And what winds up happening is you print ink on it and it runs through a press and you get a newspaper or a flyer or a poster. He loved lettering. And so he would collect lettering of all different shapes and sizes, from places that were no longer using the font. The printing presses, print shops would close down, especially in the 60s and 70s when they had the ability to do things like Xerox copies, and when computers came into being, he would buy all of these different letters and he would use them to create art. So to look at the image on the right, you kind of go, oh, that's the Paris Eiffel Tower, but he's making a joke. He's calling it a parsnip. Well, a parsnip is a root vegetable. So, and he's echoing the grid work of the wrought iron of the Eiffel Tower around the outside of it, which is kind of neat. And he would use really large type, as big as a letter would be as big as your hand, or maybe even twice as big as your hand. And he would roll several colors of ink onto it, kind of like the monoprinting we saw earlier. And he would organize things in interesting ways. And he was sort of the first one to do that. And he was really interested in politicizing art and the art movement, and questioning authority and questioning society, and playing up the notion of just words have power. So equality is something that in England and in the US and in Canada, we really pride ourselves in, that we try as much as possible for everybody to be equal. It doesn't work, but it's a hope for sure. And why are the arts so white? So in England and in the US and Canada, a lot of our museums and galleries tend to have European male white artists and not a lot else. And he called people out on that and said, this is just unacceptable. We have 220 countries, they all make art. Why can't we see art from every culture? And also just making a mark, right? Making a statement. He's really quite a great artist. Now, oh, sorry, some of this is cut off. Okay, so Pasita Abad, I work at the AGO in Toronto, and the Art Gallery of Ontario has international shows coming through. And recently we just had the Pasita Abad exhibit. She's from the Philippines. She's virtually an unknown, mostly because of the fact that she died young. And in the Philippines, the art is not considered important. Just give me 1 second here. Can you wear headphones? They can hear that. Thank you. Sorry about that. People in my house were being noisy and I didn't want it to bleed through to you. So she's a mixed media artist. These are 2 prints. Her work is massive, 20 by 30 feet. These pieces are not that massive. The piece on the left is probably 3 feet by 5 feet, and the piece on the right is maybe 7 feet by 10 feet. I'm sorry, I don't have the metric conversion of that. Probably 4 meters by 7 meters, something like that. But the print on the right, one of the things she's doing is she's being immersed in mixed media. So she's carving linoleum to create the backdrop for the woman on the left. She's using lithography, which is the stone print on the right behind the woman. And the print on the left is the most amazing print I think I've ever seen in terms of how many different layers that are going on. So she did 20 different layers of lithography using a limestone. And so the thing is with every layer of print you do, you have to register it so that it all lines up. And the more layers you have, the more likelihood you're going to screw it up, right? So she did 20 layers of lithography. Lithos require dry paper and a press and help. When it's this big, you need to have at least, I would say she would probably need to have 3 or 4 people helping her with this, just in terms of getting the paper laid on properly because the plate is at the bottom. Then she did collagraphs on top of that. So that textured print you saw, textured collagraphs need wet paper. Now she's using oil-based ink, so oil-based ink, can be immersed in water. She's also using intaglio, so all that little black line is using etching on a copper plate. And then she also did some relief printing on top of that, and I believe that had something to do with the bluish purple circles. So in the end, it was a 27-layer print. Now, to be fair, does it need to be perfectly registered when it's an abstraction? Maybe not, but I mean, it is pretty good at the registration. So it's one of those things that when you're looking at prints, count how many layers there are, look at how many different colors there are, and how are the colors put together. This is another Pasita Abad. So the full print is on the left-hand side, and this is probably 2 meters by 4 meters, so it's quite large. And the print on the right is a close-up of one of the sections. And so she was using woodcut, and she's using a lot of color underneath. So one of the things that she would have done was she would have painted all the color underneath, but she would have had to know where it all was going, because then she put the plate on top of it with all these different layers. Here's a few more close-ups of that, just in terms of different carving. Her idea is all about mark making. Here's another one that's a lithograph with some close-ups. So this is some relief printmaking of my own. and some reduction prints and some stencil and stamp. So the trees in the top left and right, there's a stencil to create these bigger shapes, and then the lino is on top as the black ink. So reduction print, one of the things that I get my students to do and I like to do is to look at individual layers and layers accumulated. So in this case, I used a piece of styrofoam. So in Canada, if we buy meat, it's in a tray that's quite soft and squishy, or takeout containers. If you're getting takeout food from vendors, that's styrofoam. And you can draw on that with a pencil. And it is super inexpensive. It takes ink really well. You can't get a ton of prints out of it, maybe 20 or 30 prints out of it. And so you can see the top layer is the yellow. And what I've done is I've just drawn with a compass what I wanted to remove. And then I started playing around with color. So I started to do warms with the orange, the reddish purple, and the blue purple. And then on the right-hand side, I used the green, reddish purple, and blue. And so you can really see how quickly you can get some really interesting and dynamic variety. This is a lino print based on a 15th century tile work piece in Rome. It's an unknown artist, but I really liked the way, in this case, Mother Mary is looking quite, I don't know, I just really liked the way her face was set up, and the way that there was this sort of backlighting behind her to kind of show she's holy. And so I created, probably 300 prints of this, and I was thinking about a reduction print. So almost all of these, with the exception of sort of the top left and bottom right, are a reduction print that is in fact 7 layers. But in the end, I mean, with a reduction print, sometimes you can reduce the surface of the lino to the point where the end result is there's almost nothing left. In this case, I wanted to make sure I wasn't taking so much away that I couldn't print it as an individual print. So the top left and the bottom right, you can see I've done other things behind it, painted gold under the Be Mindful one, and the I Will Catch You, I've used Sutaka, which is printing fish, not real fish, they're silicone fish, and then I've put some netting on there just to kind of show, in many religions there is someone who's watching over you and supporting you. Stamps and using ink to just roll color onto the paper, so the background colors are just rolled on and the stamps are in front. This is a 2-part print, and what I've done is I've done things in the background. So I have started with watercolor painting underneath using a very flat hot press paper, so super, super smooth. And so the purple one has the whole sky and sort of the meadows or fields in the background at the bottom. And then on the right-hand side, I used a sort of wet into wet technique. The bottom ones, I'm using different colored paper, and I'm also including beads. So the premise is this is looking off of a hill at 3 different distinct cities. And I've kind of done a little bit of personal choices in terms of, yes, in the city you can't really see this much detail. They're too far away. And then the lights of the city for the nighttime one are kind of showing the lights. But I liked putting in the beads to just add another texture. Okay, so some student work of this same idea. It's a 2 or 3-part cityscape with mixed media background. I wanted them to explore background, trying different things, watercolor, collage, or ink. And I wanted them to convey mood or time of day, and trying light ink to dark ink and dark ink to light ink. So these are student works, and depending on what kind of ink you're using and how dried out it is, this information below is, I think, really exquisite. I didn't want her to put this second layer on top because I didn't want her to lose this image. Ink has a really beautiful, effective way of looking like a process, but also very painterly. This student saw my beaded work and went, oh, can I add embroidery? And so she probably spent more time embroidering this than she did in the actual print. And she is from South Korea, and so this is looking from North Korea to South Korea through the fence. Thinking about stylistic choices and storytelling. So illustrators, the whole point of illustration is to make up worlds and make up places. And yes, you can copy exactly what's in front of you, but why not try to invent something? And so both of these are invented landscapes. This is a great example showing how color choices can make a difference, right? So potentially early morning on the left-hand side, maybe high noon on the middle, the second one. Again, thinking about it being noon or daytime in the third one, and then potentially thinking maybe at night or a darker time of day. And so you can get some really beautiful shift very easily, very quickly. Again, the same print, but just with different colors and different color choices. Again, 3 sets of looking at it in terms of monochromatic and looking at color complements and what happens with them in the combination. With this cityscape scene, they could do it any way they wanted to. They could have anything in their foreground. And so this is sort of sitting at a windowsill, letting a cigarette smolder, and really distinct different times of day. And one of the things I really love is the tertiary colors in the far background of the building and how it's peeking through. She was having problems with ink drying. It was drying too much and lifting off, but it was creating a really beautiful effect. Again, same image, but just 2 different ways. Different images. And thinking about color choices, so analogous colors, looking at the color wheel, colors that are right beside each other are friends with each other, right? And they can do some beautiful things as well. Now, serigraphs is one way of calling a silkscreen print. It's sort of a fancier name for it. It's a bit of a misnomer because serigraph, what does that even mean? But it's using a silkscreen to print it. So here are some of the tools that you use. And this is sort of a silkscreen setup. So I have my ink on my left with the paper and the squeegees that are going to push the ink through that opening, having a cloth, having a sponge, and having masking tape to help figure out where everything is going to sit. Registration is a critical thing when you're printmaking. So here is the way it works is you have a light table. You have a thing called emulsion on the screen. And then what you do is you use black images that are on clear acetate, and you put them underneath the screen, and the light is underneath the screen, and the black images are where the emulsion doesn't harden. So for 3.5 minutes, this is in a very, very bright light table. And then afterwards, you wash it out, and wherever you had an image and it was opaque, it would create spaces. So the screen on the right, there's also a square. You're going to see prints that are based on this image. And you can see that there's sort of a ghost print of a hand, which is something I was using in another print series. So this is all the same image. It is looking at the flower of clover. And I was exploring it with different colors of ink and different colors of paper. On the right-hand side, I've actually used a linoleum stamp underneath it to just see how that would look. Now, some famous artists. Corita Kent was around the same time as Andy Warhol. She was a Roman Catholic nun in Los Angeles, and she was part of the pop art movement. She actually got excommunicated because she was saying things that the church thought were a little bit blasphemous. And in fact, she was basically just saying everybody should be fed and war is wrong. God's not dead, he's bread, things like that. And so she would do the emulsion as part of her, to create different colors. So the I Love You Very Much on the right-hand side, each of those colors would have been a different screen, or she would have blocked off everything except those colors. And so they're all separate entities in terms of layers. So that looks like it's all 8 of the primary and secondary. So it would have been an 8-layer print. And this is her with some abstract works behind. The Love USA 22 was a stamp, probably in the late 60s, maybe early 70s. They do reprint it occasionally, but change the price of the stamp. Andy Warhol. So he was born in Pittsburgh and spent most of his life in New York City. He worked in advertising as a printmaker, painter, sculptor, filmographer. But he's most famous for his celebrity prints, his Campbell soup cans and his SOS box art. So this is, he loved the Queen, he loved the Pope, he loved President Mao. He loved sort of the celebrities and monarchs of the world. And he would do this using this emulsion with many layers. And so the Campbell soup can, this is all from the same screens. And I believe that it's 4 screens. And so the lettering, the top black lettering would be sort of the same in all of them, right? These are also silk screens. And looking at just flowers. He was very interested in floral arrangements. He was also very obsessed with shoes and handbags and taking false color images of things. So a lot of these are based on photographs. The Converse shoes on the left are looking at cut film drawing that he did. The ones on the right, what he did was he actually put a whole bunch of shoes on a Xerox machine, a photocopy machine, and took a picture of it. These ones are maybe a little bit more famous and more recognizable. The thing I love about the Marilyn Monroe is he plays around with the values and puts lights where darks are and darks where lights are. And he probably did, 200 different versions of Marilyn Monroe. She was her sort of favorite subject matter. What's interesting about his prints too is that he is very interested in just taking screen grabs or film grabs of Elizabeth Taylor, Elvis, and he would print them. And the newspaper said, well, why are you not even asking these are actors if you can take their image? I mean, their image is copyrighted by them. And of course, they asked Elizabeth Taylor, how do you feel about it? And she said, darling, all press is good press. She loved having her image out. And most artists do, most actors. Okay, so Abhishek is a very famous indigenous artist in Nunavut. So very, very North Canada. And her work is actually in our money. So this, the hologram that's happening in that clear part is one of her birds. And she printed on stone. She printed with silk screens. She did combinations with linoleum. And she was very interested in storytelling, mostly through animals and mostly through birds. Really, really beautiful work. And so some of these birds, like the bottom middle bird in particular, you can see that it has sort of a different feel than the background. And so that would have been a stone cut print. So instead of using wood or linoleum, she's using limestone and carving right into it. And then the background is either a lithograph or serograph silkscreen print. So this is a silk screen of mine showing what's called the wedding cake version. So just taking an image and reducing the amounts each time, kind of like with the linoleum reduction print, showing the surface gets smaller and smaller and smaller. These are the Venus of Willendorf, but they're fairly large. They're actually 3.5 feet tall, and I don't recommend doing silk screens that big. It's really, really challenging paper-wise and putting the ink on. These are much smaller. These are 4 inches by 4 inches. And so the background in all of these is called an open or flooded screen. And so it would just be a square opening. And what I would do is I'd put a whole bunch of ink on the top of the screen area, and I would pull the squeegee through it to create these really interesting marks. So the one with the turquoise background, I wiggled the squeegee to get those marks, right? These are silk screens, again, 4 inches each, square, and looking at using ideas through a digital means. So I like to use ArtRage. It's a much easier program than Photoshop, and working things in layers and then printing each of those layers out separately and then printing them on the screen. One of the things that I'm also working on now is street art. So I have a gallery on the street where I've just started posting messages on wood. So it's prepped wood with 2 coats of Aqualock paint, which is an exterior paint, and then 2 coats of Benjamin Moore, which is just a brand of paint we have in Canada. It's exterior house paint. And then I did silk screens on top of that. Now, all of these silk screens are cut film. So I would take a piece of acetate and cut out a window and then print it. The hand that you see here, you saw the screen for that. So that's emulsion, but everything else is a cut film. And so just in terms of, I don't know about your country, but COVID really screwed us up. We have hard times, mental health issues, people feel isolated, people feel they're broken, communities are still broken, and we're still trying to deal with that. So this is why I've made these pieces and put them in throughout the city. And I'm going to deny it if you call the police, because you're not really supposed to do that. And just thinking about the notion of starting a conversation with someone who does not look like you, and looking up and trying to be well. These are screens I did during COVID, and I have integrated other things. So the top left is a cyanotype underneath a silk screen. Dry point etching are the 2 right-hand ones with the silk screen on top. So some of them have 5 layers. The yes, no, maybe with the COVID on top is a 5-layer print because it's 5. The maybes, one kind, yes and no are each different layers. Okay, so here's some student works from Seneca, just so that you can see, you can work with printmaking fairly easily and get a pretty good product. And so the first one was I wanted them to create a meaningful message. And I didn't want it to just be drink water or Black Lives Matter or something like that. I wanted it to be a story that had something to do with them. So Owen Shroud's parents were fighting a lot, and he didn't know how to tell them that maybe they should get a divorce. And so this is what he gave them as an image. And you notice that they each have rings on their fingers. Not the right finger, but still, the notion of breaking up. Peeled with Love. Angela had this beautiful memory of when she was growing up, she'd come home from school and her mother would make her a snack and set it up in such a way that to show that she cared and acknowledged her and wanted to feed her. Each person had their own story. So Until We Are All Free is specifically looking at the Palestine, war. The work in the middle, You Don't Represent Me. This person's actually from Brazil and was told that when she came to Canada, she would be embraced and loved and cared for. but language is a barrier for her. And so she has in Spanish, "You don't represent me." And I said, but if you are trying to convey to Canadians that we're not taking care of you, you need to put it in English because we don't speak Spanish. And so interesting talking points, right? Scrolling feeds, neglecting reads, right? So we spend so much time on our phones. Do we even look at books? The other ask was for them to come up with a font or text that really worked with the image. So the nourish and flourish really harkens to the way they've drawn the character and the vegetables, right? And, you know, I told them to try and say things that meant something to them. So gun laws in the US are crazy. You can just buy a gun. Anybody can buy a gun, and that's what they're speaking to. And this one is the same thing. Okay, this is student projects with the theme of time in silkscreen, and so they had to use 2 stencils, so cutting out an opening, and then doing a flooded screen as well to kind of show that they understand the concept of different layers. And how can a picture change based on what's in the image? So, you know, looking at a clown time where this is an old, you know, sort of crusty gentleman, but he's still a clown, whereas the one on the right is the clown a metaphor for the planet Earth? You know, very different story in each one. This person is from Japan, and they were very keen on birthdays. And I guess this was what they wanted to say for it. So lots of fun images in here and fairly easy to translate. The white of the page was used, but also so the emulsion would have happened with the things like the very, very thin line in the cake and the very thin line in the lettering. Looking at time can be anything, and so some people were very simple with it and just looking at watches. The flooded screen on the right does create a very different sort of trippier mood to it. Thinking about the aging of sculptures, time through clothing, you know, sort of the 1800s, 1900s, 1970s to, you know, maybe the 2000s. And also thinking about time as in time travel and the mystical, magical world of, you know, looking at sort of, hey, at one point we were all fields and farmlands and now we're in cities. And so this character above is showing how time is passing and it's changing just so rapidly. Okay, and here's just a few more prints by myself. So prints can be used for anything. So I was tasked with making a t-shirt for the film union, which I also work with, and many hands make light work. Many hands also make movies. So many hands make light work is a phrase that we use quite a bit. And so that's what's going on with that. Looking at prints that are stamps, so using linoleum with silkscreen in behind or just silkscreen. Most of these are just silkscreen. The moon is something that I use a lot in my imagery, and so this is different sizes of moons in different ways. I've used this one moon stamp on the right-hand side here at the top, and I've just cropped it by putting a masking to show that the moon has phases. Bottom left is a 2-part moon, and the bottom 2 right ones are a reduction print. This is the moon as a silkscreen. The original version is the one on the left, which has 4 parts. And I wanted to see how minimal I could be with it. Could I use less of the images and still, less of the stencils and still think of it as a recognizable moon? This is looking at dry point, top left and middle. So using a piece of plexiglass and scratching into it. The top right is a sugar lift, so using a piece of metal plate, a zinc plate. And then collagraphs are the things at the bottom, so rubbing ink into a textured surface. And then these are monoprints in oil, and they're fairly large. They're sort of 14 inches square. And reduction prints. So this is using linoleum by my students, and they had to explore different colors and different ideas of how reduction prints would work in terms of linoleum. I wanted them to do a minimum of 3 layers, and I wanted them to play around with the notion of sort of a staircase of inking. So with this one, you know, you can kind of see that the light green was the first color over the entire thing, and then they took away various background amounts, but also they took away a little bit each time with the millipede. Same with the bear. This is showing the process work of the accumulation of layers for the next print we'll see. And these are fairly large, fairly tiny prints. They're 4 inches by 6 inches. So yeah, I don't know what that is. Probably 8 centimeters by 12 centimeters, something like that. And so you can see how they could get lots and lots and lots of different color combinations and to create a different sort of story with it. And so the theme was nature, but it could be any kind of nature, and some really interesting and beautiful color combinations. This is the process work. So the left-hand side is each layer separately, and the right-hand side is the accumulation of the layers. And so this is a targrave, which is an intergalactic animal that can live with no air for 10 years, which is kind of cool. And that's it. So I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, so that didn't take as long as I thought, but that means that we have more time for questions. So if anybody has questions, I'd love to hear them.
اوکی دوستان گفتن که هر کی سوال داره لطفاً الان میتونید دیگه بپرسین. فقط خواهشاً به زبان انگلیسی مطرح کنید. متشکرم.
Okay.
Hi. I would like to sincerely thank you for this insightful session. Your guidance and expertise have been truly valuable. I also appreciate the efforts of the Scientific Association for organizing this event, Arash and Tiam, and making it possible. And of course, thanks to everyone for their participation and engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Okay. All right. Tiam, go ahead.
Thank you for your valuable knowledge. It was our honor to have you today. I had a couple questions. I'm working on cyanotype myself.
Okay.
I went to a camp, and the person that I worked with told me about lumen prints, which she stated that it's the cyanotype materials,
Yep.
but on photographic papers.
Right.
Could you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So with cyanotype, it basically is an emulsion that you apply to paper, whereas lumen prints, what happens is they have put the coating on the paper for you, which is actually kind of a good thing, because cyanotype is sometimes it's a 2-part emulsion, and if you don't get it quite right, it doesn't work.
Yes.
The lumen print, the paper is fairly high quality, and it's in a black bag inside a hard carded folder, right? So you don't want to just take all the paper out. You want to try and take out the paper in a dark room, one piece at a time, set up everything that you're going to do with it, and then take it outside. It reacts very quickly. It tends to react more quickly even than the cyanotype, partly because I think the way they process it is they're doing it in a dark room, whereas when you're putting the cyanotype on the paper yourself, yeah, you want to be in a dark room, but do you own a dark room? Like, are you going to be in your closet? So it's a bit trickier. I would say it's worth sacrificing one piece and timing it. So you would have the cyanotype, you'd have the paper on face up with the emulsion side up, and say you've put objects on it. What you can do is you can block off with a piece of card 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, so that you can see how long it takes to actually do a really deep, rich print. And then that way you can kind of, gauge that. The other thing you want to gauge is time of day.
Yes.
So you want to make sure that it's not a cloudy day. You don't want to be doing it at 7 o'clock at night or 9 in the morning. You kind of want to do it at around noon or 1 o'clock where the sun is or when the sun is really at its zenith.
Yes, yeah.
And you might want to do it outside as opposed to through a plate glass window, because depending on what the glass is, sometimes it has UV protectant or is tinted. That will affect it too.
Yes. So the method is the same. It's just the surface is different.
That's right. And usually those packages will tell you what you're supposed to do with the print afterwards. So like once you've printed with cyanotype, you have to then soak it in water to stop it to continue reacting. And I've seen that particular product where you don't have to do anything or you have to do lots of things. So each one of them is a little bit different. Usually it is stopping it by putting it in water.
Yes. And what is the best surface for cyanotype itself? What do you recommend? Because here I used Consul paper.
Okay.
And it was okay, but I also used a Rosespina paper.
Yeah.
It's a type of, and it didn't work out. The result was just horrible.
Right.
So what is the best surface? Of course, I'm not aware of whether the brands that you use in Canada is also available in Iran, but I just wanted to know what would you use as the best surface for cyanotype?
Okay, so that is an excellent question, and it has to do with the sizing in the paper. So if it is paper that has been, that has a lot of glue in it, it tends to do a little bit of a different thing than if it has less glue in it. It also is different if it's cotton, 100% cotton versus pulp. So if it is tree pulp paper, it won't be as bright as if it's cotton. So it kind of is the same method as if you were using watercolor paper, right? So watercolor paper, if it's cotton, the color is much more vibrant than if it has tree pulp in it. I would say that you might be able to get Ingres or Fabriano paper because they're from Europe and you're a bit closer to that than us. But,
yes, we do have Fabriano, but most of them are fake.
Oh.
They're
okay.
But, super expensive.
Right. It is.
Yes.
It is. So I would recommend that the company that you're purchasing the cyanotype from, you might want to say, can you please recommend the best paper you have found with this? You could potentially Google, I know for myself, there's a couple of different brands of cyanotype. I like the Speedball personally, and Speedball's a North American company. It's an American company. I believe there is some cyanotype from England and Italy, but I know that they do try to do tests to make sure that it's the right kind of paper. I do think cotton-based paper would be better, and the less the problem is if it has no sizing in it, when you soak the paper, it falls apart. So you need to have some sizing in it. But
Yes.
cotton-based paper is a better method, I've found. Cotton clothing does beautiful stuff with cyanotype. It just sucks it up and does a really great job. So
Yeah.
cotton is the better bet.
Thank you. And I had another question. For the monoprints that you've mentioned, you said that you use oil color. Am I right?
Yep, for some of them, yep.
Yes, for some of them. And I tried it once, but it didn't work as well. The oil started bleeding through the surface after a few months. So I wanted to know what kind of surface that you used. Or is it bleed for you too?
Right. So, okay. So you don't want to put a lot of linseed oil in the paint. That's what's bleeding out is the linseed oil. And you don't necessarily want to use too many mineral spirits or things like that to thin it. I have found, I was actually using cardstock, which is something that you would use through a photocopier, but it's a heavy pound paper. It's like sort of 67 pound, or what would that be? That would be 90 gram paper. So like photocopy paper is very thin, right?
Yes.
The heavier the paper, the better. I have found too that when you're using the oil paint, really mix it with your fingers in the tube to make sure that it's really mixed well. Yeah, the oil, that sort of halo that happens around it, it just means that maybe you're using a potentially poor quality paint that has a lot of binder in it and not a lot of pigment.
Yes.
So you might maybe want to not mix it and let it kind of have all that greasy oiliness stuff and just wipe that away so that it's pure oil paint.
That's right.
Yeah.
We do have the problem with oil paints quality here.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
not really good.
Well, you're not alone. We have poor quality here too.
We have Windsor, which is just super expensive, but the quality is amazing.
Right.
We use Vesta, which, if I'm not mistaken, is from the ingredients is from France.
Right.
But it will be filled here in Iran.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's the point. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm very eager to have more collaborations in the future.
Sure.
Thank you. I want to thank my friend Torange also. She contacted you in the first place.
Yeah.
I don't know if she's in the meeting, but thank you so much for your time and your effort and your valuable knowledges.
All right.
I will email you again in order to get the PowerPoints or the files that you spoke about, you mentioned in the beginning.
Right.
And I will send it to the individuals.
Great. Yeah. What I have is I have a sheet of videos. I've done a lot of YouTube videos, mostly because of COVID. I couldn't demonstrate and teach at the same time, so I made them watch the videos. And it looks like Rosina has raised her hand. You have a question? Feel free to unmute.
My name's hi. I just had a little question. I was wondering that can we have your email address in order to in the future I had some question. Can I ask you or be in touch with you? Is it possible?
Yeah, sure.
If
absolutely.
you don't.
Yeah, no, I don't mind doing that. That's not a problem. I mean, I am a teacher and I am fairly busy, but I also know that sometimes it's just hard to get the information you want question-wise. And so, yeah, by all means ask. And if you ask me 500 questions, I might only answer some of them. So, but I'm totally fine with that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, feel free to, Fatima, if you have a question, go ahead and ask. Oh, there's more than one Fatima. I didn't see which one it was. The Fatima that has a question, feel free to unmute.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. I very appreciate for your time. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I would like to ask you a question. I was an architect student, so I want to start the printmaking, and also I want to ask you which type of printmaking is good to start for me. My style, my painting style is very, very near to lithography on metal or metal plate printmaking, but I also like jelly printmaking. So I would like to understand which printmaking is good for start for me.
Okay.
Yes.
That's a good question. So,
Thank you.
okay, so the biggest challenge with a lot of printmaking is you usually need, with some of the printmaking, you need to own a press or you need to have access to a press. So I'm not sure what your school, it seems like all of you are maybe in the same school. I don't know if there's a print studio in your school. So that really limits you. The copper plate or the zinc plate, technically, even the plexiglass, you potentially could do it without using a press. But you're not going to get the mezzotint. You're not going to get the fabric on plates. You're not going to get sort of the blackwood, all that range, right? What you saw with the little moons that I had done, with the exception of the zinc sugar lift one, all of those other ones, I did use a press, but I also did it without using a press. So, but it's line drawing, and the thing that's great about that is you put it on a piece of plexiglass so you can trace it out. So you don't need that many tools. You basically need ink, a stylus, piece of plexiglass, and something to burnish it with. And the burnishing can be done with a spoon. Doesn't even have to be done with brayers, or something that looks kind of like this, which is a baron to push down on. And they come in a bunch of different sizes and shapes. The jelly plate, and so with that one, with the jelly plate, you could wind up purchasing something that's kind of this size and using a brayer, right? So this is sort of $20 Canadian, this is $20 Canadian, and I'm not sure what that translates to Iranian money. But then you also need ink. Now, you can use oil paint, you can use acrylic paint. So if you already own those, then you have whatever colors you own. But then the cleanup is, with the acrylic paint, you have to use, water and soap. With the oil paint, you have to use, sort of olive oil and then soap. And it's pretty immediate in terms of getting results. Like if you want instant, I want to make art right now and I want to be done right away, do the jelly plate. Very fast. You're going to get abstraction. You're not going to get reality. If you want reality and you want really fine, crisp, tight lines, then the plexiglass is kind of good. The moon prints I showed you and the prints that were of the meadows, I was just using a rough hog's hair brush on a piece of plexiglass and painting it on. And that painting it on, then I just put the paper on top and then I burnish it with this guy. So you can get quite a lovely painted, detailed thing with that. And so that plexiglass, if you decide to do it intaglio or if you decide to do it in mono printing with oil paint, you just flip the plate over, right? So one side's scratched and one side's not. Those can all be done in your kitchen, right? You don't need to own a print studio. Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, it looks like Mundanu. Sorry, I'm maybe butchering her name. If you have a question, feel free to unmute. Oh, and Rosina. So I'm not sure who was first in the queue. Let's do Madnuna first. Okay. There's a few voices happening, so if you can speak louder, maybe we'll just hear you and not your background noise.
Is okay now?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not an appropriate place, but I have a question. If you have a channel YouTube or something, can you mention that in this message section and your email address?
Sure. Yeah, my YouTube channel is actually my name. So I've got mostly teaching videos, but I also have videos of my own work, which is set to music, and some sketchbooks and things like that. So by all means, yeah. I'll put that in as well. Sure.
I'm grateful.
Okay, you're very welcome. And there maybe was someone else. Mobina, feel free to ask if you have a question.
Hi.
Yeah, hi.
I have a question. In the beginning of the session, you showed us some print that has a line texture and a scratch texture on it. And some of your Iranian students did it.
Right.
It was a print of a view of a view of a city. I want to ask, how can we add that texture, I mean a scratch texture, on our print? I didn't understand it very well.
Oh, okay. Well, with the plexiglass, you are scratching in using what's called a stylus, but it basically has the point a little bit like a nail, but it's a long, sort of, it's like a pen, but it's not a pen. It's made out of metal. And so as they were drawing, they were doing cross hatching, right? And building it up that way. In terms of what the ink was doing, the challenge with the ink is as you're erasing the ink or rubbing the ink into the surface of the plate, what winds up happening is whatever you're using, whether that's cheesecloth or newsprint, it will make a mark. So if you crumple up your newsprint, it's going to make a mark. And if you use cheesecloth, it's got a grid on it. And so it will make a mark. So with the student works, we were not doing anything that was using an acid bath. It was just straight drawing.
Yeah, I got that. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, any other questions? Okay, maybe not. Well, it was really fun to kind of figure this out, and I felt honored that someone figured out I was a person to ask questions to. And I will include my if address to TM and the other organizer from my end. And, if you do have questions, that's great. I can answer them. I will suggest use, I don't know what your platforms are like there, but we have Google, which is, ask Google and it will tell you everything. Because you can look through YouTube and you can look through, other video platforms. I would suggest maybe doing that first. And then if it feels like, yeah, you're not getting your specific question answered, then ask me. Just because I do work in the film industry as well. So I kind of work about 70 hours a week. And so I might not get to you right away. But I will send you my video channel, and it has a bunch of examples of videos on how to do different types of printmaking. And so then maybe some of those will be answered with that.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for considering your time in the weekend. I know it's the weekend there. Thank you so much. If my friends doesn't have any more questions, we can end the program.
Yeah.
Okay,
right.
Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day, and I hope you try printmaking at some level. Okay, bye now.
Thank you so much. Have a good day. Bye.